Whoever told you the night shift was hard or unpredictable was lying. It's not most of the time. The majority of the shifts you work are uneventful, boring even. But you deal with the boredom because you need the money and don't mind staying up until the sun rises. Or at least that was the case for me. College is a bitch. Whoever told you that was telling the truth. It is, has been, and will continue to be a bitch. During summers, I worked at a small motel right off an isolated portion of Interstate 75 to help pay for it. It was the only place around for miles that wasn't a McDonald's or gas station with ads from the 70s plastered on the walls to this day. My job was at the check-in desk. I sat there from sundown to sunup. Occasionally someone will come in, usually a tired family who decided that their choice to drive through the night was a bad idea after all. When I worked there, during the summers of 1987 to 1990 and all of 1991, I enjoyed it, as much as you can enjoy isolation anyway. My shift started at 9:30 and I sat down in my fantastically worn-in chair, turned on the box TV mounted in the corner, and kicked my feet up. Mr. Lee, the owner of the Brubaker Motor Court, was too cheap to pay for any more stations, so I was stuck with the grand selection of 7 channels to choose from. Half of those being local access channels that didn't play anything half the time. Clouds had been looming the past few days and threatened to wash out every dirt road in the county. The skies had finally opened up, and it had started as just a trickle when I sat down, but quickly morphed into a torrential downpour within minutes, which quickly turned my 7 channels into none as the power went out in one quick moment, and I was left in darkness. I let out a sigh and opened the bottom drawer of an empty metal filing cabinet that had probably been donated to Mr. Lee, knowing how much he despised investing in anything off the shelf. In the bottom drawer was a small assortment of well-read paperbacks ranging from Lawrence Block to Stephen King. I fished out one with a decent-looking cover that hadn't been too damaged, as well as a matchbook from a bar I'm pretty sure was torn down before I was born. I opened the flap to find 3 were already missing. I lit the candle and scanned the plot synopsis on the back. Decent enough, I thought, and plopped my feet back to the same spot on the desk and opened to chapter 1. I was only 3 pages in when I heard the door chime. I looked up and lowered my feet as the door closed behind a man hunched over, hands clasped over his stomach. Headlight beams now pierced through the glass windows that lined the front of the building, turning him into a silhouette. "I need help," the man mustered out through a painful groan. "Whoa, what's going on?" I asked, picking up the candle and used it as a light to assess what was going on. Wax dripped down over my knuckles, but I didn't notice. I held the candle up to him and the small, flickering light revealed his tattered shirt, partially covered by the trench coat he was wearing. Fresh, viscous blood seeped through his fingers and had begun to form a small puddle on the rarely mopped linoleum he was standing on. "I'm hurt," he gasped before his legs buckled and he collapsed into the puddle. Shit, I muttered to myself as I hopped around the desk, candle still in hand. I held 2 fingers to his neck with my free hand to check for a pulse. It was slow, but he was still alive. "Hey!" I shouted at him. "What happened?" Nothing. Was there a wreck? I tried again, but still nothing. I pulled back his rain and blood-soaked coat. He was wearing a gray t-shirt. Maybe it was white. It was hard to tell. The shirt had been turned into rags, barely clinging to his body. He had been slashed from his shoulders to his waist. Blood was gently but steadily seeping from his wounds and making the puddle large enough that it was slowly surrounding him and now myself as well. I placed the candle next to him and dropped his head back to the floor before jumping to my feet and around the desk again. I crouched underneath and groped around frantically in the dark for the ancient first aid kit that hadn't seen daylight since it had been placed under this desk long before I started working. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, I found it. My hands wrapped around the cloth pouch and dragged it out from underneath. I undid the top and felt around for anything useful. All I could find were some expired Band-Aids, a cloth bandage, and hydrogen peroxide. I grabbed the cloth and peroxide and stood up. The man on the floor was groaning now. I didn't know if that was bad or good, but at least he was moving. If it's leaking oil, it's got oil, I thought to myself. I knelt next to him and pulled his shirt up to assess the damage in its entirety. Long, jagged rips across his chest. Not cuts, rips. Not from going through a windshield, I could tell that much. Something had been dragged across his chest with enough force to cut through bone. I uncapped the peroxide and began pouring indiscriminately all over him to get as much surface area as I could. He recoiled and screamed in a way that suggested he was mustering all of the strength he had to tell me to stop putting him in more pain. I tried to wrap the bandage around him, but to no avail. My heart raced faster than I thought possible. In the back of my head, I remember thinking, if it keeps going like this, it'll pop like a fucking balloon. My head darted and swiveled around the room until it landed on the desk. I stood up and darted to it as fast as I could. Only 2 steps, but that didn't stop me from slamming my chest into it as I did. I reached over, grabbed my stapler, and brought it back around, holding it close to my chest. I fell to my knees and fumbled the 2 steps back over to him. I undid the latch on the bottom, and the stapler swung open. "I'm sorry," I said to him under my breath. I pinched the skin together and gently pressed the stapler to the wound. I took a deep breath and put enough pressure on it to shoot a staple into his flesh. He screamed again, but this time with less power to it. I stapled again along the same wound and he barely made a peep. Exhaustion was my guess. He groaned or jolted slightly with each new staple, but nothing more than a gentle reminder that he was alive. When I finished with his chest, it looked like something out of a Texas Chainsaw movie. Rows of unevenly spaced staples, trying their best to hold together flesh that wanted nothing more in the world than to rip back open and let out more blood. I looked up and past the headlights shining into the office, and through the rain, I could see a man standing in the parking lot alone. My eyes fell back down to my main priority in front of me, and his eyes were open. He was staring daggers at me, choking somewhat, like he was drowning on dry land. He tried to spit something out to me, but I couldn't hear it through his desperate gasps for air. "What?" I asked. He trailed off again. "He's what? Who is he?" I was losing my mind, trying to find out why he was choking, but nothing was making itself visible as his words made less and less sense with every syllable. "He's here," the man choked out through a throat filling rapidly with what I could only assume was blood. I don't know a lot about medicine or how to be a fucking doctor, but here I was, standing over someone I had stapled back together like Frankenstein. I still couldn't figure out what he was trying to convey. I was too preoccupied with figuring out what the next problem was and why he could barely speak. I tried to decipher the cryptogram I had been given for all of 2 seconds that felt like 2 years when I was ripped from my melancholy by something smashing into the glass wall next to me. I looked up just in time to see another man, this one wielding an axe and finishing another swing that shattered the window entirely. He was clad in a light tan jacket and jeans soaked through in rain, blood, and viscera. In one swift movement, he was over the knee-high part of the wall made of actual drywall and taking a swing at me. I tried to roll out of the way, but my knees fumbled in the still fresh puddle and I splayed out. The axe came down and the top half of the blade was buried into my left calf. I was stunned for a moment, staring, trying to comprehend what was happening. It was a weird sense of not believing what I was seeing, or at least denying it, as if there was no possibility of it being my leg. The lack of pain for the first few moments helped reinforce this idea. When he pulled the axe head out, it all hit me at once. An explosive burning emanated from my calf and up to my face in less than a heartbeat. I began breathing faster, now bordering on hyperventilation. I scrambled to my feet, regretting it instantly. The pain was magnified the moment I tried putting any weight on that leg, but somehow I was able to rationalize that I had 2 options. Fight through the pain and have a chance at living, or sit there and die. I staggered to my feet as the axe was brought down only a few inches short of my heel. I hobbled on my right leg as far as I could when he brought the axe to his chest and started after me with it. I ran past the desk and through the door that faced the motel. I grabbed my ring of room keys as I passed without noticing it. I grabbed the aluminum handle and flung the all-metal door open with all of the force my arms could muster as my heart still raced 1,000,000 miles an hour. The rain pelted me across my body, quickly matting my hair to my face. He was behind me now, no more than 5 steps away. I tried putting one of the keys on the ring into the lock, but nothing. I tried to isolate another key to use as I looked over my shoulder. He was 4 steps away now. I slid the key into the lock and started to turn the tumbler. 3 steps. He was raising the axe now. I turned it all the way and grabbed the handle. 2 steps. It was above his head and he was bringing it down quickly. The door began to fly open, but at that point, the blade was lodged firmly into my skull with a loud and wet ka-chunk. I still remember what it felt like, splitting my skull into 2 even pieces and almost splitting my nose as well. My vision went black at once, but I still felt my surroundings. I felt the top half of my body hit the carpeted floor inside. I felt my hand rip from the doorknob and smack onto the floor next to me as well. I had no control over anything and couldn't move. That's when this ringing started. Ear-splitting and annoying. It hurt worse than the axe being removed from my skull as brain matter stained the still semi-new carpet. The blackness quickly morphed into a bright white light. It started as a pinhole far off in the dark, but it grew larger and larger with each passing millisecond. As it did, the ringing grew louder and louder. I tried to clench my eyes shut, but that doesn't really work when you're dead, or whatever I was. In less than a moment, it was over and the blackness returned. But it was different. A forced blackness is the best way I know how to put it. I opened my eyes, and the ringing was gone. I was back to sitting at my check-in desk. The TV still turned onto a local access channel while the storm outside pounded against the windows. My stomach turned inside out. My vision began to rapidly focus and unfocus again and again. I was stuck, frozen in my chair, unsure of whether or not to run, cry, or spill my guts at once. I bent down and rolled up my left pant leg and stared at my calf. A large but ancient scar sat where the axe had struck, the first of its kind. I stared at it, running my fingers along it, unsure of what to think. I'm going crazy. I'm going fucking crazy. I had felt everything from the stapler in my hand as I punched one after another into that man's skin. I had felt the fresh blood soaking through my jeans as I had tried to scramble away. I had felt the axe. I had felt everything. The nausea came to a head and I scrambled out of the office chair and hunched over the beige plastic wastebasket. My knuckles were white on its rim as if the wastebasket were the only thing holding me to the ground. I wiped my face clean with my arm and stood up, using the desk to support me as I regained my footing. I took a few deep breaths and kept repeating to myself, "You probably fell asleep or something. None of it really happened." To which the other half of my brain begged for an explanation for the jagged scar that now adorned my calf. I sat back down and rested my hand on my palms. I shut my eyes and continued to take more deep breaths. I lied to myself over and over again when I heard the TV cut off mid-sentence. I opened my eyes and watched as they darted around the room like a scared rabbit. The hyperventilation returned, and I felt my hands move across the desk and grab onto the candle that still had yet to be lit. I opened a drawer and fished out the same book of matches. I opened the flap and counted them all. It was still missing 3. I broke the same one I had before from the pack and struck it against the front. I held it to the wick before blowing out the match. I tried my best to calm myself down again, repeating the same phrase ad nauseum until it became a meaningless group of unrelated syllables, inhaling the scentless smoke from the candle as I did. The door chime sounded. No, not now, not ever. I looked up to the same thing I had before. A man silhouetted in headlights shining through the windows. His shirt was in tatters, soaked through in blood. I rose from my seat, a lot slower this time. "Who are you?" My voice trembled as I asked. "Nothing." "What's going on? Why is this happening again?" My voice began to crack. A ball had begun to form in my throat, choking me as I tried to speak. He was still quiet for a moment before his legs buckled again and he hit the floor in the same spot. Shit. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't allow myself to just leave him there, could I? I crouched down again, and this time my hands found the first aid bag and unzipped it. I only pulled out the peroxide this time. I grabbed the stapler and the candle with my free hand before rounding the desk again. Each step was a case of déjà vu multiplied to the extreme. I knelt again, setting everything down next to me as I did. I opened his jacket and lifted his shirt, and there were the same wounds. All in the same spot. They were last time. I doused him in the peroxide and began to staple him up. As odd as it may sound, I was more focused on my breathing and trying to fight back the tears that had started to well up and cloud my vision. The man began to let out. "He's here." I turned my head and saw exactly what I had expected. A man clad in a bloody Carhartt jacket and viscera-covered jeans raising a fireman's axe before slamming it down with all of his might into the window, which didn't shatter on the first swing. I climbed to my feet as I watched him raise it again before forcing it into the glass window that shattered this time around. I'm not proud to admit I froze as I watched him sling it over his shoulder before swinging it like a bat where it made contact with the side of my temple. The blackness returned. So did the ringing. I tried my best to peer through the never-ending veil of darkness that had blinded me as I felt my body fall to its knees, suspended by the axe head before I felt the sole of a boot press into my chest and the axe head peel away from my head as I fell back over my knees. My entire left side now rested on the man who had first entered the office. The bright light reappeared before abruptly vanishing along with the ringing. I was back sitting at the shitty particle board desk. I was more angry than scared at this point. I rubbed my hands across my temples when I felt something odd, a long, thin patch of skin that ran along the left side of my head that was covered by my hair. I stood up, still keeping my hand over it to make sure that it wouldn't disappear. I walked to the bathroom that was no more than 4 or 5 steps away from my desk and flicked on the light. It took a moment, but the naked, incandescent bulb flickered to life. I held my head no more than an inch away from the mirror and pulled my hair out of the way to see another aged scar to complement the one still on my calf. It began to burn slightly as I ran my hand over it. For once I wasn't scared, I was devoured by it, staring at it in the mirror trying to decipher it like a puzzle. The hiss of the light bulb surged louder for a moment before ceasing along with the light itself. I opened the bathroom door and peered out into the office. I judged that I still had a few moments to try and figure out what to do. I looked at my chair and my bag sitting next to it. I moved closer as I allowed my idea to fully materialize. When I reached it, I fished my car keys out and made my way to the front door. I was parked 5 spaces from the door. I was practically sprinting when I pushed the door open. I wrapped my hands around the driver's side door and slid the key into the hole. I turned it and hit the button before flinging the door open hard enough to have a chance at knocking it off its hinges. I sat down in the driver's seat and punched the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, trying with all its might to turn over, but nothing. In my haste, I turned it again and again until it flooded. Fuck. God fucking damn it. I slammed my hands on the steering wheel while cussing at it, at the car, at everything. Why me? Why the hell did I have to be the one this happened to? Behind me, headlights reflected off of my mirrors. I turned around to see a man skid to a stop in the rain, only avoiding a collision with the wall by a few inches at most. He climbed out of his car with considerable effort before collapsing onto the ground. He waited a moment to get up. When he had finally built up the energy to try and stand, he began using the car as a support. It was fascinating to watch, like a triathlon where the winner was picked in advance. I watched as he clambered for the front door, using the car to support his weight as he inched closer and closer to the door, checking over his shoulder every other step or so. I found my eyes had begun to dart back and forth from the man to scanning the rest of the empty parking lot, waiting for another car to pull in. Through the heavy rain, a rust-red pickup drifted into the opposite end of the lot with its lights and engine off. My heart skipped a beat. There was only one person that pickup could belong to, and I didn't want to see him. I shrunk in my seat, pressing my feet flat against the floor, and buckled my knees to make myself as small as possible. I had lost control of my lungs again as the hyperventilation returned. Calm down, calm down, calm down, I muttered to myself in an attempt to quell the knot that had formed in my chest and made its way up into my throat. My hand was shaking, uncontrollably so. I flattened my palm and held it between my face and the bottom of the steering wheel. It went from earthquakes to tremors and eventually to barely anything at all. I peeked over the ledge of the door and through the window. Not far from my car was the pickup, parked in the middle of the lot with its driver's side door open. Standing in front of the grill, maybe 4 feet from my taillights, was the man in the tan Carhartt with the fireman's axe scoping out the check-in office. I recoiled back down into the safe little hole I had taken for myself. Yet again, I was finding that I had to rationalize the situation to myself, breaking down every little thing that had happened up until now. First the rain, then the storm, then the power went out, then this, then that. None of it was working. Nothing was helping. I peeked up again to see that he had moved a few feet forward and was heading for the office. Now or never, right? I wrapped my fingers around the handle and slowly pulled it towards me. I winced when the latch popped and the sound of rain filled the car. I swung it open and rolled out less than gracefully, falling flat onto my chest with one leg still hooked on a bracket under the seat. I scraped my hands against the wet cement and scrambled to my feet. I peered around the car to see him raising the axe to smash the window. I didn't know if this was the first or second swing, and in all honesty, I didn't care. I kept moving away. I wasn't sure where I was running to exactly, but anywhere was better than the fucking Brubaker Motor Court. I got to the road when I heard the window shatter before the man who had first staggered in let out a pained and blood-curdling scream. I looked both ways over and over again, head on a swivel until I gave up on looking for any headlights. I looked back over my shoulder when I saw the man starting back towards his car. When we locked eyes from a distance of maybe 30 feet, he began to jog after me, the axe swaying from side to side in his hands with each step. He called out for me, something between a hey and just a yelp. I began running in the opposite direction out onto the road and down, hoping, praying that he would just give up. Who was I kidding? Of course he wouldn't. I was a nuisance that needed to be disposed of. I looked over my shoulder with every step. The lack of streetlights made it harder and harder to tell what was happening behind me. I ran until my legs gave up. I collapsed in the rain, cursing whatever had thrown me into this. I didn't choose this. I didn't want to be here. After a few moments, I could make out the rumble of the engine through the torrential downpour that was occurring all around me. Headlights pierced through the thick fog of rain, and I stood to my feet, flailing my arms every which way to signal that I needed help. I began to jog toward the sound and the lights until I was able to make out the silhouette of a square-body pickup. For less than a second, everything froze. My heart skipped a beat, and I lost the steady rhythm of breathing I had finally established. I turned heel and ran in a straight line as fast as my legs would take me. It hurt knowing that I had been this close to help. If I had just stayed on the ground, I might have been okay. The sound of the engine was getting closer. I could almost swear that I felt the rubber tires burning the backs of my heels. I ran until my shoe caught a stray rock, causing my knees to buckle. I hit the pavement with a loud and wet smack. It was less than a heartbeat until the hot rubber tires I had felt on my heels were now rolling their way over my spine. Eventually it came to a stop once my skull shattered with a loud crunch. The bright white appeared again as I felt the rain wash the blood that had just made its way to my fingertips. The ringing filled my ears again before I was back in the office chair. My stomach churned. I fell to my knees and scrambled to the bathroom on all fours. When the toilet was within arm's reach, I wrapped my arms around it in a tight embrace. By the time I was finished, it felt like I had just done a deep cleaning of my stomach, like someone had moved out and left a room for rent sign in the front yard. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and tried to hold back tears. Yet again, the question was raised in my mind. Why me? Why now? I stood up and looked at my face in the mirror. It looked older, worn down mostly. My eyes had sunken into my head and looked dead when accompanied by my ghost-pale skin. A walking corpse seemed like a more apt description. I didn't bother feeling for the scar I knew would be on the back of my head. I turned on the forever cold faucet and let a small puddle build up in my welled hands. I splashed it on my face to elicit some kind of feeling. All I managed to do was wet my face and turn a portion of my hair a darker shade of red. The naked incandescent bulb above flickered, telling me that I didn't have a lot of time before the cycle repeated itself. Or continued to repeat itself, I thought. I walked back to my desk, fully resigned to the situation. I had thought of everything I could to get away. So far, no matter what I tried, there was no point in trying. Every action had been accounted for. I plopped back down in the office chair, ready to accept my fate. If I'm lucky, this will be the last go-around. Wishful thinking. My eyes fell upon the stapler again. I wasn't sure what I was thinking. The thought still had yet to materialize in any meaningful way. Almost on cue, the lights cut out again. As they did, I was able to decipher my own train of thought. I picked up the stapler and began to violently smash it against the edge of the metal filing cabinet that had held the books and matches. The clanging of metal on metal was grating to the ears, but my plan was working. The shell of the stapler was metal, not the folded aluminum the inner mechanism was constructed with, but a more robust metal that I never figured out the name of. As the headlights of the injured man's car shined through the windows, I managed to break off a piece of the shell, leaving a large jagged edge. I unclipped the latch on the bottom and let it swing open. With one last heavy swing against the edge of the now warped filing cabinet, the shell came free of the stapler. I held it close, hovering my finger atop the freshly serrated edge, trying to convince myself that it was sharper than it appeared. I glanced up when the door chime triggered. The bloody man was stumbling in again, asking for help with the exact same words, in the exact same cadence, before dropping to the same spot on the bloodied checker linoleum floor tiles. I gripped the stapler shell harder as I stared out the window with enough concentration to shatter the glass. When the pickup idled into the lot, I took a deep breath to center myself. For the first time this entire night, I wasn't scared. I wasn't confused. I was angry at whatever god or force had put me in this loop. I was mad that I had become collateral in something that never should have involved me. The man in the bloody Carhartt stepped out of the cab of his pickup before reaching back inside for his axe. He was across the parking lot in 7 or 8 large strides. Just like before, he raised the axe above his head and brought it down against the glass with little success, only managing to create a large spiderweb pattern across the glass. After bringing it down the second time, the axe head tore through the window like tissue paper. He stepped inside and glared at me. This was the first time I had been able to get a good look at him. Lit with thunder and rain, his face was jagged and unfriendly. Go figure. A large scar ran from his chin to deep inside his scalp where it was covered by a thick head of greasy jet black hair. He swiped the axe at me, almost catching my stomach before I jumped back. It was less than a moment before I lunged at him, holding the stapler out as I did. I wasn't aiming for anywhere in particular, and that may have been to his advantage. The stapler made a sizable slice in his midsection. Most of the impact had been caught by his coat. He paused for a moment as we made eye contact. The look on both of our faces could best be described as confused. He grabbed me by the hair and lifted me off my feet. A large burning sensation spread across my scalp as he began to pull upwards. I yelped as my feet lost contact with the tile. He raised me nearly a foot off the ground to compensate for the height difference between us. At eye level, he studied me. The look of utter fear on my face must have been a sight. I struggled, gripping and smacking his arm with open and closed hands in an unsuccessful attempt to get him to drop me. His eyes drifted to his other hand, raising the axe to us. He loosened his grip on the handle and let it slide down where he caught it near the top. He smiled, revealing a mouthful of rotted yellow and black teeth as he held the sharp edge of the axe head to my face and pressed down. Gently at first, but eventually harder as it started to draw blood. I struggled even more, flailing my body as much as I could. Eventually, my knee scraped against the back half of the stapler, still barely clinging to him. I drew my leg back before throwing it forward as hard as I could. It made square contact with the stapler and drove it deeper into his stomach. He dropped me painfully to the floor as he recoiled. I skittered backward, pushing my feet against the floor as hard as possible before standing. The smile had vanished from his face as well as the axe from his hand. It clattered to the ground with a loud thud as the metal hit the floor. He reached down for it, but I was quicker. Whether I was faster because of adrenaline or he was slower because of the stapler doesn't matter at this point. I raised the axe above my head as high as I could. He held out a hand and started to speak for the first time as I brought it down. He shouted something I couldn't understand, or maybe didn't care to, as I dropped the blade firmly into his shoulder blade. The jacket couldn't have stopped that one. He wailed in pain as I ripped it out of him before raising it again. His was a shorter distance, but it made an impact all the same. He dropped to the floor on top of the man he had been hunting. If he wasn't already dead from blood loss, he was now. I raised the axe again and brought it down. This one landed firmly in his throat. He struggled against me, gripping at the axe handle as he started to lose consciousness. I hacked at him over and over and over again until he barely resembled a human being anymore, until there was no chance he was coming back again. The final blow lodged in his ribcage, and when I could no longer lift it out, I let go. I took a step back and looked at my hands. It may seem cliché, but that was the first thing I looked at. My skin was stained deep with red. My clothes were soaked through in a mixture of his blood and my own. My knees buckled and I hit the floor. I couldn't take my eyes off him. My eyes clouded with tears. I held my face in my hands and began to sob. My shoulders threw themselves up and down involuntarily as tears wiped away small streaks of blood from my face. I sat there for what felt like hours, rocking back and forth, snot and tears streaking down my face before being brought together at the tip of my chin. Memory is a funny thing. There are certain moments in everyone's life that they can recall with stunning accuracy, and others they couldn't remember if they were being tortured. This is one of those moments for me. I remember with enough detail to paint a picture of the way the man fell, the way the axe felt as it cut through bone and viscera. I remember everything, but the hours following are blacked out, redacted, like it was worse than the things I had already been through. What I know about what happened after is what has been told to me. I had driven into a 24-hour gas station doing at least 75 miles an hour and nearly took out a pump as the tires skidded to a stop on the slick concrete. When I came running through the doors still bloody, the man behind the counter called 911, jabbering almost incoherently about a girl covered in blood screaming bloody murder about, well, murder. The next morning, when police taped off the lot and news vans had blocked most of the road reporting on the crime of the century, I couldn't have cared less. It was all for views. Their fake smiles gave it all away. The only part of this that they cared about wasn't the story. Not about everything the lone survivor, which is what the various multimedia conglomerates had taken to calling me, had gone through. None of it. All they saw was a quick way to capitalize on it with some variation of the same phrase over and over again. Our hearts go out to the families of all involved. The railroading I got from them during the few interviews I had reluctantly agreed to may have jaded me a little. After an investigation corroborated my story, at least the story that didn't involve me dying over and over again, I was cleared of any wrongdoing. Like so many others, my story was eventually drowned out by the next big thing that all of the reporters could use their favorite phrase on again. Within a few months, I was back to being a nobody. Invisible, the way I wanted it.